The alien assassin who couldn't resist her target's human bodyguard. The twin suns of Yervos Prime hung low in the sky, their light refracting off the city's crystalline waters far below, casting fractured rainbows against the domed skyline. The capital was a marvel of engineering, its layered platforms suspended in air by gravimetric anchors. Here wealth and innovation gleamed in every polished surface, but beneath that shine, corruption festered. Eclipthor perched high above the thrumming gala below, her matte indigo skin blending seamlessly into the dim shadows of the observation spire. Her augmented limbs, sleek, silent and precise, moved without a whisper as she adjusted the magnification on her ocular implant. The councillor was there, standing in the center of the gathering, oblivious to the hunter above. "Eric Maveth," Eclipthor murmured, her voice low and edged with disdain. The name felt sour on her tongue. Not because she harbored any hatred for the man himself, he was by all accounts unremarkable, but because of what he represented, a disruption. His quiet campaign to upend galactic trade monopolies had earned him powerful enemies, the kind that didn't issue warnings. Her handler's voice crackled in her earpiece, clipped and emotionless. "Status?" "Visual confirmed," she replied, her tone betraying none of the turmoil simmering beneath her calm exterior. "Taking position." The handler's approval was a static-laden hum. "No room for error, Eclipthor. You know the cost." She did. Failure wasn't an option, not for someone like her. The augmentations grafted to her body had once been sold as tools of perfection. But she knew the truth. They weren't enhancements. They were shackles. Each metallic joint, each pulse of synthetic power, was a reminder of her servitude to a system that viewed her as both indispensable and expendable. With a sharp breath, she refocused. Below, the gala's lights glittered against the translucent dome, its edges alive with shifting holographic patterns. Music and conversation rippled upward, faint but persistent. These were the elite of Yervos Prime, their wealth shielding them from the chaos of the galaxy. Eclipthor's target was among them, gesturing animatedly to a cluster of delegates. Her enhanced vision locked onto him, mapping his movements. The plan was simple, a single pulse dart to the jugular, silent, lethal, and clean. The councillor would collapse, his death attributed to the stress of politics. No questions, no complications, except for one. As she calibrated the targeting module embedded in her forearm, a figure moved into her line of sight. Male, human, and exuding a wariness that set her instincts on edge. He wasn't like the other attendees who laughed too loudly and carried themselves with the ease of those unaccustomed to danger. This man scanned the room with sharp, deliberate glances, his posture rigid but fluid, like a coiled spring. Eclipthor's eyes narrowed. She adjusted the implant again, focusing on his face. The faint scar tracing his jawline, the weary intensity in his gaze, and the barely concealed readiness in his stance screamed military. Her pulse quickened as the realization settled in. A bodyguard. "Unaccounted variable," she muttered under her breath, rerouting her approach in her neural interface. The augmented targeting array shifted, recalibrating her aim, but before she could fire, his gaze snapped upward. It wasn't random. His eyes locked on her position with a precision that sent a chill down her spine. Impossible. Eclipthor moved instinctively, rolling back into the shadows just as a tiny, silent projectile embedded itself in the wall where her head had been. She glanced at the fragment. It was a tracer, designed to mark targets rather than kill. The realization hit her like a blow. He wasn't just a bodyguard. He was hunting her now. "Damn it!" she hissed, her hands moving in a blur as she disabled the targeting module and activated her cloaking augmentations. Her body shimmered, blending into the spire's metallic backdrop. But the cloaking wasn't perfect. Motion could still give her away. A voice called out from below, sharp and confident. "You can run if you want," the man said, his words laced with a maddening blend of certainty and sarcasm. "But I don't miss twice." She froze, her enhanced hearing amplifying the tone of his voice. There was no panic, no bluster. Whoever this human was, he believed every word he said. Eclipthor's neural interface flagged potential escape routes, overlaying her vision with a spiderweb of options. She chose the fastest path, a maintenance chute leading to the city's lower levels. She moved like a shadow, her augmented limbs absorbing every vibration as she slipped through the narrow shaft. Below her, the gala continued unabated, the laughter and music oblivious to the unfolding hunt. But the moment she emerged into the city's sprawling underbelly, a labyrinth of machinery and forgotten corridors, the hunter was there. He leaned casually against a rusted support beam, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. The dim light caught the edges of his features, rugged, weathered, and frustratingly confident. "Not bad," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Most people panic when I'm on their trail. You, though, you've got some moves." Eclipthor didn't respond. She calculated the distance between them, weighing her options. She could close the gap in a second, use her augmentations to incapacitate him before he could react. As if sensing her thoughts, he raised a hand, palm out. "Easy there. I'm not here to make a mess, not yet anyway." Her silence stretched, the tension between them palpable. "What's your angle, human?" she finally asked, her voice low and edged with steel. He tilted his head, studying her with a mixture of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite place. "You're the one with the dart gun and the fancy cloaking tech. Maybe I should be asking you that." Eclipthor's jaw tightened. She didn't like the way he looked at her, not with fear or hostility, but with something closer to admiration. "Move," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a lopsided grin that made her irritation flare. "See? That's the thing. I don't take orders from mysterious, shiny assassins who crash fancy parties, but you knew that already, didn't you?" Before she could respond, the distant echo of footsteps reached her ears. Reinforcements. Zyphon's expression shifted, the humor fading into something colder. "We've got company," he said. Eclipthor hesitated, her instincts warring with the unfamiliar pull of trust. For reasons she couldn't explain, she didn't bolt. "Then we'd better move," she said finally, her voice steady. Zyphon's grin returned, sharper this time. "Now you're speaking my language." As the footsteps grew louder, the two moved as one, slipping into the shadows of the labyrinthine undercity. For the first time in her career, Eclipthor found herself working with a target instead of eliminating them. And for the first time, she felt the thrill of uncertainty. The underbelly of Yervos Prime was a world apart from the gleaming upper layers. Here, the crystalline beauty gave way to cold steel and flickering lights, the air thick with the tang of coolant leaks and ionized fumes. Massive industrial machinery loomed like sleeping giants, their quiet hums masking the occasional hiss of pressurized steam. Eclipthor moved in silence, her matte indigo skin blending seamlessly with the dimly lit surroundings. Her augmented limbs absorbed the vibrations of her steps, rendering her movement nearly imperceptible. Her thoughts, however, were anything but calm. The human had followed her into this labyrinth, and worse, he had kept up. Few could match her speed, let alone anticipate her maneuvers. She was the predator, yet here she was, stalked and cornered like prey. Ahead, the shadows shifted. She crouched, her enhanced optics sharpening to reveal the source. A faint beam of light swept across the corridor, accompanied by the unmistakable tread of deliberate, measured steps. Him. "Really?" Zyphon's voice echoed faintly, laced with humor and just enough bite to make her jaw tighten. "You're making me work for this. I have to say, I respect the effort, but you're not exactly being friendly about it." Eclipthor exhaled slowly, forcing her irritation down. He was trying to draw her out, but she wasn't so easily baited. "Come on," he called out again, his tone light but his steps cautious. "You don't have to keep running. I'm not your enemy." She shifted her weight, her neural implant marking multiple routes for escape. Yet something rooted her in place. His voice, though maddeningly confident, carried an edge of truth. He wasn't like the others she'd faced, those who hunted with blind hatred or cold calculation. This man, this Zyphon, was different, and that was dangerous. From her concealed position, she watched him approach. His face, rugged and faintly illuminated by the flicker of an overhead panel, betrayed no sign of fear. His movements were deliberate, as if he knew she was watching and didn't care. "Fine," she muttered under her breath. With a flick of her augmented wrist, a razor-thin blade extended from her forearm. She stepped out of the shadows, her form materializing like a specter. Zyphon froze, his hand hovering near the holstered weapon at his side. "Impressive," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Most people would have bolted by now." Eclipthor tilted her head, her voice calm and measured. "Most people aren't worth my time." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Flattered? Really? Before he could move, she closed the gap between them, her blade pressed lightly against his neck, her augmented strength holding him in place. "Talk," she said. "Why are you following me?" His expression didn't waver. If the blade against his throat unsettled him, he didn't show it. "Because you didn't seem like the drop a councillor and walk away type," Zyphon replied, his voice even. "And I don't like loose ends." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't even know who I am." "True," he said, his tone maddeningly casual. "But you've got this whole mysterious assassin vibe going, and that tends to come with complications. Call me paranoid." Eclipthor pressed the blade slightly harder, enough to draw a single bead of blood. "And you're not afraid?" Zyphon's eyes flicked to hers, steady and unflinching. "Afraid? Sure. But fear's not going to stop me from doing my job." She searched his gaze, expecting bravado or defiance, but there was none. Instead, she saw something far more unsettling: sincerity. Her grip loosened just enough to let him breathe easier, though she didn't withdraw the blade. "Who are you?" she asked. "Zyphon Kale," he said without hesitation. "Ex-Special Forces, currently babysitting a councillor who probably deserves to get stabbed. Your turn. Got a name?" For a fleeting moment, she considered lying. But something about the way he spoke, the blunt honesty in his tone, made her decide otherwise. "Eclipthor." He raised an eyebrow. "No last name?" "None that matters." The silence between them stretched, taut with unspoken questions. Finally, Zyphon raised his hand slightly, a small gesture of surrender. "Look," he said, his voice softer now, "you don't want to kill me and I don't want to shoot you. How about we stop pretending we're enemies for 5 seconds and figure out why we're both here?" Her instincts screamed at her to finish the job and leave, yet inexplicably she hesitated. "What makes you think we're on the same side?" Zyphon's smirk returned, though it was faint. "Call it a hunch. You don't seem like the cold-blooded type. Besides, if you were here for the councillor, you wouldn't have waited so long to make your move." Eclipthor frowned. He was sharper than she'd given him credit for. "The councillor," she said slowly, "is a liability." "To who?" She didn't answer, her gaze flicking to the dim corridor behind him. The faint sound of distant footsteps reached her enhanced hearing, growing louder by the second. Zyphon heard it too, his posture shifting as his hand moved toward his weapon. "Friends of yours?" he asked. "Hardly," she replied, retracting the blade and stepping back. "You've been tracked." "Not my first choice," Zyphon muttered, drawing his weapon and checking the charge. Eclipthor's neural implant projected the quickest escape route, but her gut told her the odds weren't in her favor. "Follow me," she said, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. Zyphon's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but he didn't argue. The two moved in tandem, their steps nearly silent against the grated floor. Eclipthor's augmented vision scanned ahead, mapping the corridors while Zyphon kept watch for their pursuers. "They'll have drones," she warned. "Of course they will," he muttered, his tone dry. "Why make it easy?" She cast him a sidelong glance. "Do you always joke during life-threatening situations?" "Only when it helps me not think about dying," he quipped, his lips curving into a faint grin. "You should try it sometime." Eclipthor didn't respond, her focus sharpening as they reached a narrow access hatch. She yanked it open with ease, motioning for him to follow. The hatch led to a maintenance shaft, its walls lined with cables and blinking nodes. The air was stifling, heavy with the smell of ozone and grease. "Cozy," Zyphon remarked, his voice muffled by the tight space. "Keep moving," she snapped. They emerged into a larger chamber, its floor covered in coolant puddles that reflected the pale light of flickering overhead panels. The sound of their pursuers was distant now, but Eclipthor knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Zyphon lowered his weapon, his eyes scanning the room. So what's the plan? Or do you just wing it as you go? Eclipthor's lips twitched, though she quickly suppressed the urge to respond. You don't trust me, she said, ignoring his question. He met her gaze, his expression serious. No, but that doesn't mean I'm not willing to listen. For reasons she couldn't explain, his words struck a chord. Then listen carefully, she said, her voice firm. If we survive this, we'll talk. Until then, stay out of my way. Deal, he said, his smirk returning. But for the record, I've been told I'm pretty hard to ignore. Eclipthor turned away, biting back a retort. She had a mission to complete, and distractions, especially human ones, were a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet, as they prepared to face the next wave of danger, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was only the beginning. The rogue station hung against the black canvas of space like a forgotten artifact, its jagged edges silhouetted by the dying star it orbited. Faint rays of crimson light bled through the vast web of steel beams and ductwork, casting an eerie glow across the exterior. Known as Vornik's Haven, it was a haven for outlaws, smugglers, and those who traded in secrets, the kind of place where information held more value than currency. Zyphon adjusted the collar of his jacket as they disembarked, the station's stale air hitting him with the distinct scent of rust and poorly maintained oxygen scrubbers. Around them, the corridors buzzed with faint neon lights that flickered erratically, reflecting off walls plastered with holographic advertisements for weapons, ships, and services he didn't dare think about too hard. This place screams trustworthy, Zyphon muttered under his breath, his gaze darting to the motley assortment of beings milling around. Eclipthor, walking a half-step ahead, didn't look back. Keep your observations to yourself, human. The fewer questions you ask, the longer you'll live. Helpful, Zyphon replied, his tone drier than the recycled air around them. Do they engrave that on assassin business cards, or is it more of a mantra thing? She shot him a sharp look over her shoulder, her matte indigo skin seeming to absorb the dim light. If you're done testing my patience, we have work to do. He grinned despite himself. The way she said it, like every word was perfectly measured to convey disdain, amused him more than it should have. Maybe it was the contrast, her clipped professionalism clashing with the chaos of their surroundings. As they entered a larger chamber, the station's true nature became more apparent. Towering scaffolds crisscrossed the open space, each crowded with alien vendors hawking wares. Pulsing orbs of light served as makeshift lamps, illuminating tables stacked with illicit tech, exotic weaponry, and vials of substances that glowed faintly. The voices of countless species filled the air, a cacophony of sharp clicks, guttural growls, and the occasional oddly melodic phrase. Eclipthor moved through the crowd with an ease that unnerved Zyphon. She was like a blade slipping between armor, her augmented limbs brushing aside anyone who came too close. How often do you come here? He asked, struggling to keep pace. Not often, she replied, without slowing, but enough to know where to find what we need. And what exactly are we looking for? She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her glowing eyes narrowed as she lowered her voice. Answers. If you're smart, you'll let me do the talking. Smart's subjective, Zyphon quipped, though he gestured for her to lead. But sure, lead the way, O great dealer of death and secrets. She ignored him, her attention fixed on a small booth tucked into a shadowed alcove. The vendor behind it was an Uthraki, a wiry alien with translucent skin that pulsed faintly like a jellyfish. Its bulbous eyes swiveled toward them as they approached. Eclipthor stopped a pace from the booth, her expression unreadable. We need information on the Syndicate's movements, specifically their operations on Yervos Prime. The Uthraki made a sound somewhere between a gurgle and a laugh. That's dangerous knowledge you're asking for, it replied, its voice wet and slithering. Expensive. Eclipthor reached into a compartment on her forearm, pulling out a small cube that shimmered faintly in the dim light. She placed it on the counter, her tone firm. Payment in full, no haggling. The vendor's eyes widened slightly before its thin fingers snatched the cube. Generous, it murmured, tucking the payment into a hidden pouch. You'll find what you're looking for in Dock C Level 6, but tread carefully. The Syndicate has eyes everywhere. Eclipthor nodded, already turning away. Zyphon followed, though not without shooting the Uthraki a wary glance. As they climbed the spiraling staircase to the upper levels, he leaned closer. "How do you know you can trust that thing? It looks like it belongs in an aquarium." "I don't trust it," she replied flatly. "But I trust its greed. The Syndicate's reach is long, but their credits aren't infinite." Zyphon considered her words, his hand brushing against the weapon holstered at his side. He'd been in enough shady dealings to know greed was as reliable as it was dangerous. Still, something about the way she carried herself, calm, unflinching, kept him steady. The air grew colder as they reached Dock C, the hum of machinery louder here. The sprawling dockyard was filled with vessels of every shape and size, many of them modified in ways that likely defied a dozen intergalactic safety regulations. Eclipthor paused, her gaze sweeping the area. Zyphon caught the subtle shift in her posture, the faint tension in her jaw. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. "Something's off," she said, barely above a whisper. Before he could respond, the hiss of a pneumatic door echoed behind them. Zyphon turned just in time to see a group of figures stepping into view. Their armor bore the distinct, jagged insignia of the Syndicate, and their weapons were already raised. "Well," Zyphon said, drawing his own weapon with a sharp click, "this is cozy." Eclipthor didn't reply. Her augmented limbs flexed, the faint glow of power surging through her body as she moved. The first shot rang out, and the dockyard exploded into chaos. Eclipthor darted forward with inhuman speed, her blade slicing through the nearest attacker before they could react. Sparks flew as the edge of her weapon met the reinforced plating of another Syndicate operative, her movements a blur of precision. Zyphon stayed at her flank, his blaster barking as he laid down suppressing fire. "You know," he called out between shots, "for someone who doesn't trust me, you're awfully comfortable fighting at my side." "Focus," she snapped, her blade arcing through the air and disarming another foe. "You're welcome," he muttered, ducking behind a stack of crates as a volley of plasma bolts scorched the air above him. The fight was brutal but brief. Between Eclipthor's lethal efficiency and Zyphon's calculated improvisation, the Syndicate forces were soon reduced to smoldering bodies and scattered equipment. Eclipthor wiped the blood from her blade, her expression cold as she turned to Zyphon. "We need to move. They'll send reinforcements." "Agreed," he said, his breathing heavy, but even. "But next time, let's try not to announce ourselves with gunfire. Yeah?" She didn't reply, already scanning the nearby ships for an exit strategy. In the corner of the dock, a small freighter hummed faintly. Its ramp extended as if inviting them aboard. Zyphon followed her gaze, his lips curving into a grin. "Looks like our ride's ready. Think they left the keys inside?" Eclipthor didn't wait for his sarcasm. She strode toward the ship, her augmented limbs moving with a grace that belied their mechanical nature. As they boarded, Zyphon glanced back at the dockyard, his grin fading. "This isn't just about the councillor, is it?" he asked, his tone quiet but pointed. Eclipthor hesitated, her hand hovering over the ship's controls. For a moment, her usual composure faltered. "No," she admitted, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "It's bigger than that." Zyphon nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then let's make sure we live long enough to figure out how deep this rabbit hole goes." The ship's engines roared to life, and as they shot into the star-streaked void, Eclipthor couldn't shake the feeling that they were just beginning to uncover the true scope of what lay ahead. The asteroid's hollowed-out core stretched before them like the yawning maw of a beast, jagged walls glowing faintly from veins of raw energy coursing through the rock. This was the Syndicate's hidden base, concealed within a dense debris field that could rip apart any ship foolish enough to approach without precise coordinates. From the cockpit of the stolen freighter, Zyphon leaned forward, studying the chaotic expanse. His sharp gaze traced the erratic orbits of shattered debris, their fragmented reflections spinning in the weak light of a distant star. "You weren't kidding," he muttered, tightening his grip on the controls. "This place screams no trespassing." Beside him, Eclipthor's matte indigo skin seemed almost black in the dim light of the console. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes fixed on the asteroid ahead. "It's heavily shielded," she said, her voice a steady whisper of focus. The approach is designed to weed out amateurs. Zyphon gave her a sidelong glance. Good thing neither of us are amateurs, right? Her lips twitched, a faint shadow of a smirk, but she said nothing. Instead, she adjusted the freighter's trajectory with precise movements, her augmented limbs responding faster than the human eye could track. "Are you sure about this?" Zyphon asked, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "We walk in there with a fake story and some stolen credentials, and we're one wrong word away from getting spaced." She met his gaze briefly, her glowing eyes unflinching. "Do you have a better idea?" He let out a low whistle, leaning back in his seat. "Nope, just making sure we're both clear on the stakes." Her fingers tightened on the controls, and for a moment, her calm facade cracked. "I've always been clear," she said quietly. Zyphon said nothing, his attention returning to the asteroid. But her words lingered, a reminder of the thin line they were walking, and how easily it could snap beneath them. The freighter docked with a sharp hiss of pressurized air. Inside the station, the Syndicate's fortress was a labyrinth of cold steel and brutal efficiency. The walls pulsed faintly with power, casting long shadows that seemed to shift with every step. Armed operatives moved in disciplined patterns, their jagged insignias glinting under harsh artificial light. Eclipthor and Zyphon moved in unison, their stolen credentials granting them passage through the first few checkpoints. Each interaction was a calculated dance, Eclipthor's precise, clipped responses paired with Zyphon's effortless charisma. "You don't look like Syndicate material," one guard remarked, his voice rough and suspicious. Zyphon leaned casually against a railing, his grin sharp. "That's the idea. You hire someone who looks like trouble and people start asking questions. Me, I'm invisible until it's too late." The guard snorted, waving them through, but Eclipthor's jaw tightened. She didn't trust the ease with which Zyphon navigated situations like these. It was a skill honed by years of deceit and survival, and while it had kept them alive so far, she knew the Syndicate wasn't easily fooled. At the heart of the station, they found what they were looking for, a command room lined with consoles displaying holographic maps, encrypted data streams, and surveillance feeds. The air hummed with quiet tension as Syndicate officers worked in focused silence, their backs turned to the newcomers. Eclipthor's gaze flicked to Zyphon, who nodded subtly. They moved quickly, slipping behind the nearest console. Eclipthor's augmented hand extended a thin filament, plugging into the station's systems with a faint click. Streams of data flooded her vision, projected by her neural implant. "Can you get what we need?" Zyphon whispered, his eyes darting to the room's exits. "Working on it," she replied, her voice clipped. "This isn't a simple grab and go. The encryption is sophisticated." "Great," he muttered. "Take your time. It's not like we're standing in the middle of enemy territory or anything." She shot him a glare but didn't reply. Her focus was on the data, unraveling layer after layer of digital defenses. The deeper she went, the more unsettling the picture became. "They're not just targeting Mavith," she said softly, her words laced with disbelief. "The Syndicate has plans to destabilize the entire council. They want chaos. Galaxies turning on each other, trade routes collapsing." "Why?" Zyphon asked, his voice tight. "Power," she replied. "They thrive in the void left by war. The more the galaxy burns, the more control they seize." Before Zyphon could respond, the station's alarms blared to life. Red lights flared across the room, and the officers turned, weapons drawn. "Step away from the console," one barked, his rifle aimed squarely at Zyphon's chest. "Great timing," Zyphon muttered under his breath. Eclipthor moved first, her blade flashing as she lunged toward the nearest attacker. The room erupted into chaos, the hum of energy weapons and the clash of steel echoing through the air. Zyphon ducked behind a console, firing precise shots that sent operatives scrambling for cover. "You know," he called out, "I'm starting to think your plans could use a little less winging it." Eclipthor didn't reply, her movements a blur as she dispatched another operative with surgical efficiency. The fight was brutal and unrelenting, and despite their combined skill, the Syndicate forces were overwhelming. Eclipthor's augmentation strained against the tide, and Zyphon's quick reflexes were pushed to their limit. "We need to move!" she shouted, her blade slicing through a cluster of cables to create a wall of sparking debris between them and their attackers. Zyphon nodded, his breath coming in ragged bursts. "Lead the way, Shiny!" They sprinted through the corridors, weaving between panicked Syndicate personnel and automated defenses. The base's structure groaned under the strain of the alarms, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning circuits. As they reached the hangar, Eclipthor's handler appeared, her face projected in stark detail across the wall. Her expression was cold, her voice sharp. "Eclipthor, stand down!" Eclipthor froze, her fists clenching. "I know what you've done. The Syndicate isn't just a client. You're working with them." "Careful," the handler said, her tone icy. "You don't want to make enemies you can't outrun." Zyphon stepped forward, his weapon raised. "She's not running. You, on the other hand." "Enough!" Eclipthor interrupted, her voice steady. "I'm done taking orders from you." The handler's image flickered, her lips curving into a cruel smile. "Then you've signed your death warrant!" Before Eclipthor could respond, Zyphon fired a shot at the projection, the wall behind it exploding in a burst of light. "Less talking, more leaving," he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the nearest ship. They launched into space moments before the base's defenses reoriented, plasma bursts streaking past their hull. In the cockpit, Eclipthor slumped into a seat, her glowing eyes dim with exhaustion. "You okay?" Zyphon asked, his voice softer now. She nodded, though her gaze remained distant. "The Syndicate won't stop, neither will my handler. This isn't over." He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Good. I like a challenge." For the first time in what felt like hours, a faint smile touched her lips. The borrowed ship hurtled through the void, its engines straining against the pulse of enemy scanners chasing them. A glowing planet loomed ahead, a dying star's last orbiting child, its surface scorched and cracked, but still alive with faint storms of light. Eclipthor's augmented hands flew over the control panel, the ship dipping and weaving as Syndicate cruisers gained ground. "This is not sustainable," she muttered, her voice a razor's edge of calm. Zyphon tightened the straps on his seat harness, his fingers brushing the holstered blaster at his side. "I'm assuming that's assassin speak for we're screwed." "More or less," she replied without looking at him. "Great. Glad I strapped in for optimism." The ship jerked as a plasma bolt grazed the hull, sending a shudder through the cabin. Warning lights blinked across the console, painting Eclipthor's indigo skin in harsh reds. "We're taking this down there," she said, nodding toward the planet ahead. Zyphon stared at the cracked world, his brows lifting. "Are we going to die before or after we land?" "That depends on how much you annoy me before we touch ground." His laugh was short and sharp, but he didn't argue. Instead, he braced himself as Eclipthor pitched the ship into a sharp descent. The atmosphere hit like a wall. The ship rattled violently, its shields flaring with pale light as fragments of debris rained down, igniting into fiery trails. Eclipthor's jaw tightened as the gravitational pull yanked them downward, the planet's surface rushing up to meet them. When they emerged from the wreckage, the air was thick with heat and ash, the landscape stretching around them like the remains of a shattered mirror. Jagged canyons cut through the surface, glowing faintly from the molten rivers below. Above, lightning licked across heavy clouds, casting the ground in brief, brilliant flashes. "Well," Zyphon said, dusting himself off as he surveyed the ruin, "this is cozy." Eclipthor ignored him, her enhanced vision scanning the horizon. The Syndicate cruisers hung in orbit, but they hadn't followed them to the surface. Not yet. "They're watching," she said, her voice low. "Let them," Zyphon replied, checking the charge on his blaster. "We've got the home field advantage." "Do you?" The voice came from behind them, a calm, measured tone that sent a jolt through Eclipthor's core. She turned, her blade springing into her hand in one fluid motion. A figure stepped from the shadows of a nearby crag. The Syndicate emblem glinted faintly on her armor, but it was the eyes that held Eclipthor's attention. Cold, sharp, and impossibly familiar. Her handler. "You were always my best," the woman said, her voice as smooth as glass. "But I'm disappointed, Eclipthor. All this for a councillor, for a human. Zyphon raised his weapon, his jaw tightening. You've got a lot of nerve for someone outnumbered. The handler smirked. Outnumbered? From the ridges above, figures emerged. Syndicate operatives clad in dark, angular armor, their weapons trained on the pair below. Zyphon's grip tightened on his blaster. You just had to poke the hive, didn't you? Eclipthor didn't respond. Her gaze remained locked on the handler, her mind racing. What do you want? She asked, her tone cold. The handler took a step closer, her movements deliberate. I want you to remember who you are. You were made for this, Eclipthor. Precision, obedience. Do you think you're anything without it, without me? I think I'm free, Eclipthor said, her voice steady. The handler laughed softly. Free? You've traded one leash for another. Do you really think the human beside you cares about anything more than surviving this moment? Zyphon bristled, but Eclipthor placed a hand on his arm, stopping him before he could speak. I know what you're trying to do, she said, her blade glinting in the faint light. But it won't work. The handler's smile faded. Then you leave me no choice. The operatives fired. Eclipthor moved first, her augmented limbs blurring as she leapt forward, deflecting the barrage of plasma bolts with her blade. Zyphon was a heartbeat behind, his blaster barking as he provided cover fire. The air exploded with noise and heat. The ridge became a war zone, bolts of light streaking across the ashen sky. Eclipthor fought with calculated precision, her every movement a blend of human grace and mechanical efficiency. Zyphon, by contrast, was raw and improvisational, rolling behind cover, firing in bursts that kept their enemies off balance. You always this flashy? He called out, ducking as a plasma bolt scorched the rock above his head. Eclipthor didn't answer. Her focus was on the handler, who remained still amidst the chaos, her calm demeanor unshaken. Finally, the tide began to turn. Operative after operative fell under their combined assault, their precision no match for the chaotic dance of human instinct and augmented fury. When the dust settled, the handler stood alone. She looked at Eclipthor, her expression unreadable. You're wasting your potential, she said softly. This rebellion of yours will cost you everything. Maybe, Eclipthor replied, her voice steady, but at least it's my choice. The handler's eyes narrowed. For a moment it seemed she might say more, but then she raised a device in her hand and in a flash of light, she was gone. Zyphon exhaled heavily, holstering his weapon as he surveyed the bodies around them. Well, he said, his voice wry, that was invigorating. Eclipthor turned to him, her glowing eyes studying him intently. What? He asked, his brow furrowing. You didn't have to stay, she said quietly. You could have left. He shrugged, his grin faint but genuine. And miss all this excitement? Not a chance. Her lips twitched, a flicker of something that might have been a smile. Come on, she said, turning toward the jagged horizon. We're not done yet. Zyphon followed, his pace matching hers, as they disappeared into the storm. As they walked, the planet seemed to shift around them, its scorched surface alive with faint tremors. The storms above roared, but the silence between them felt heavier. Finally, Zyphon broke it. So, what happens now? Eclipthor didn't stop, her voice calm. The Syndicate won't stop coming. My handler will send others. And us? She glanced at him, her glowing eyes softer now. We keep moving, we stay ahead. He nodded, his expression unreadable. I can live with that. The storms raged on, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Eclipthor felt a glimmer of something she couldn't quite name. Freedom. And beside her, a human who had become far more than an ally.